It says I'm live. 6 seconds of live worth. Let's see if anybody starts showing up here. Shed some light on the subject. I've gotten all my hard candy out of the way for Mr. Brent Billings. Let's see, is my mic moving? Looks like it's moving. Oh, goodness, Reed. Don't tell Reed he's the only one watching right now. That'd be the worst. There we go. Now people are flooding in. Hey, Karina. Uh, I don't know if I have been. Well, I might have been sneaking some of those on recent podcasts. It might be true. It might be true. All right, let's see here. Let's remind ourselves as we get started here. I've started doing this with every live stream, just reminding us that the Q&A is really a misnomer because this isn't really about the A's. It is about the Q's. It's about the questions. It's about making sure that we know that, I don't know, I just don't feel like we have enough space sometimes to ask questions. So these live streams are kind of like a fun space to ask well-intentioned questions and be okay with that and remind ourselves that asking questions is part of what this whole thing's all about. The study, the journey, all of it. Part of it is learning how to hopefully model a way to hear questions, receive questions, hopefully when the time is right to say, I don't know, to affirm people when they're asking questions. I hope throughout these whole live streams, that I'm respectful, and it'll probably not be a shocker that I don't always agree with every perspective or question or whatever that comes in, and yet to be able to handle those things with hopefully respect and honor other people. I mean, hopefully these are all things we just don't have as much spaces. We don't have the spaces that do this enough, I don't think, in ministry and life and the church and whatever. We love to get on Facebook and argue in comment threads. We love to argue in YouTube comments. We love to get on Twitter and post sound bites, and the world of social media has not been kind to hospitable places. And so it's no big strategy or genius move. I've just wanted to use social media in spite of itself, somewhat subversively, to say, let's create a space and use it well, because social media should be able to do that too. So that's what we do. This is really about the answers. I don't really have a ton of answers. People have reminded me of that, not so kindly, the last month or so. They've been really kind to tell me how wrong I am about things. It's good. It's good. It's good. I'm wrong about a lot of things. Michael Burns reminded me of this recently. N.T. Wright loves to, when he starts a talk, say, 10% of what I say is wrong. I just don't know which 10% it is. And I'm sure the number is a lot higher for people like me. So 30% of the things that I say and think and put out there are wrong. I just don't know which 30%. And I try to remember that as I say it. So we'll do that too with our Q&As. We'll do that with our live streams. We'll do that with these spaces. We'll try to hold things loosely and remember we got thoughts. We got some things that we've learned. Some of those things have even been wrong. Some of those things have been right. But what's even more important is how we hold ourselves, the posture we bring to conversation, to questioning, the posture we bring to interact with other people. So, yeah. All right. I'll probably get better at giving that little intro and maybe not take so long to give it. How long we at? 4 minutes. 4 minutes and 20 seconds to do all that. Anyway, let's get into it. The people have sent in some questions ahead of time. Where should we go first? We had one question come in on Twitter. We had some questions come in on Instagram. We had some questions come in on Facebook. We had some questions come in on Slack. So we'll start with, I'm in Facebook. Let's start with Facebook, shall we? Let's do that. Oh, let's see here. We will We'll start with Facebook. Tina asks a question. Do you have any favorite Lenten resources? I'm currently reading The Last Week. That was recommended in session 3. It is a great book. And I'm curious if you have other suggested readings during this time in the church calendar, either specific to Lent or just Holy Week in general. Last Week is a good book. I don't know if I'd have a lot of Advent's the same way, but I love to find just like a good. Sometimes they can be online, sometimes they're printed. It's those are 2 seasons where I love just to get a good devotional written by great authors that either have a reading a day or a reading a week. I recently, in the last year or 2, got a subscription to Christianity Today, and they have for every Advent and Lent season that I've had a subscription, they've sent, a well, produced, devotional for those seasons, and there's some really cool reflections in there. I don't have anything like a long resource list for those things necessarily. Um, I will say this, that Lent this year, well, what are we? We're not even halfway into it. We're in second week, second full week of Lent. And just already, God's just, for me personally, just really speaking a Lenten theme very clearly that has not been, um, it's not been hiding. It's a Lenten theme that's there every year. And for whatever reason, I struggle to, like, this doesn't like hit my consciousness. Like I hear it, but it doesn't like take root. And this year, for whatever reason, the um the conversation about death and what Lent is trying to teach us about death, opening with Ash Wednesday. I was having conversations with Reed Dent, if he's still on the stream. Don't let this go to his head. He doesn't need any more praise than he already has. But we were chatting about his message that he gave for Ash Wednesday at CCF there at Truman's State University. Had a great conversation about that. I just got he's still here. Oh no. Um I just got done reading my own copy. Like I've interacted with and used bits and pieces and heard people quote an excerpt out of The Prophetic Imagination by Walter Brueggemann. I mean, it had its 40th anniversary, like, I don't know, years ago. I don't know if it's coming up on its 50-year anniversary yet, but that's a great book. And it's not necessarily about Lent, but he talks at length every chapter about empire and shalom. Like he'll say empire. He doesn't necessarily say empire and shalom like we do on Bema, but he talks about empire and the narrative of empire and how what the empire is attempting to do, the imperial narrative is trying to make us numb to the idea of death, to try to get us addicted to our own permanence and our own significance, the lies of those things. And part of what the prophetic voice, the prophetic imagination does is it reminds us of and it makes sure that we confront and it forces us to make decisions about our own temporal natures, our own finiteness, our own. And so I don't know. That's about as good as I got for that. But that's what I'm doing this year. That's what I'm experiencing this year. And just all those conversations between my Lenten devotional, personal conversations, other things that I'm reading, and then Brueggemann's book, The Prophetic Imagination. That's just been a heavy uh, lesson for me this year. And it's not. I don't know if it's. I don't think it's over. And I'm glad because I want to sit and learn some more. That might be a whole season until resurrection is upon us. Who knows? Megan, do you have recommendations for books or other resources meant to help teach non-Jews about Judaism, to learn more about the festivals, rabbinic tradition, etc., from a Jewish perspective, but accessible to someone without a Jewish background? Yeah, hang with the podcast, and we'll continue to give like all kinds at the appropriate time when we talk about different aspects. We're going to continue to recommend resources, and I try to give comments on what stuff is like less academic. Like we don't recommend anything that you have to have a Jewish background to understand. There's nothing that's not like Bema is not about a Jewish conversation. It's about bringing the Jewish context to a very Gentile and evangelical conversation, a lot of those resources are much more academic. And so um, I think I understand kind of like what you're getting at. One of the things that you'll hear me say in session 3, I feel like one of the best entry points to this conversation is Lois Tuerberg's books. So Lois Tuerberg, Lois Lois, and then Tverberg is how you want to spell it. Tverberg. She wrote Sitting at the Feet of Rabbi Jesus, Walking in the Dust of Rabbi Jesus, Reading the Bible with Rabbi Jesus, and just super accessible, but still deep and profound, and but very, very accessible. Um, Epic of Eden by Sandra Richter was another great read. Starts to get a little bit more academic, but um, and that's always a great place to start. A good study Bible can go a long, long way. And some of the study Bibles that I always talk about are a little bit more heady and a little bit more academic for those people that are like really wanting to get into the Hebrew, that kind of stuff. But I would say Kent Dobson uh, edited a book. I can't remember what it's a study Bible. If you just went on Amazon and searched Kent Dobson study Bible, it's going to have like all the Bema goodies in it. Like Kent and I shared a lot of same teachers and those kind of things, and it will have a lot of very like Bema-y stuff. Then there's the cultural background study Bible. I prefer the NIV version, but I think they have ESV or other translations if you so prefer. But the cultural background study Bible is, as far as I can tell, the newer version of what I use, which was the Zondervan Archaeological Study Bible. The footnotes on that stuff, and again, that's not necessarily Jewish and Judaism, but you're going to find a lot of that in all the appropriate places there. Um, Somebody sent me a copy of the Jewish Study Bible, and there's a lot of study Bibles out there by the name the Jewish Study Bible. There's a newer one published by Oxford. And I'm actually really, really optimistic about that. The scholars that have endorsed it and that have contributed to it, it's a great list. So that should be a wonderful resource. I haven't used it as much as I would like to. Um, and other people have recently wrote me. At one point, we recommended the Jewish Annotated New Testament, which I didn't actually love that much. I thought it had some really helpful things in it and some things that drive me crazy. But some other people have like 2 people this week wrote me and it's like, "Man, that's a great resource. I love that." So cool. And if it's a great resource for you, do it. Lean into it. Love it. Um, but then there's like all the heavier, more like I love Robert Alter's stuff. His translation of Tanakh is fantastic. Um, yeah, just there's a ton of just great stuff. So let's see. And there's probably a million things that I'm forgetting. I love Aleph Beta. Like we talk about Rabbi David Foreman all the time. That's Judaism in a Jewish context. It's not made for Christians. It's not Jesus, but it's Judaism as it teaches through Torah and other parts of the Hebrew scriptures, but it's very accessible. And so it's a I think it's a great place to learn. I don't think you have to be a scholar to appreciate that. Um, yeah, I'm trying to think of anything else that I would tell people about entry points. I mean, obviously, my teacher was Ray Vanderlaan. He has all of his DVDs and videos, very accessible. It's just going to cost you like 400 or 500 bucks to have all the DVDs and to buy and purchase them all. But if money's not an issue, there you go. Meredith, I'm trying to learn that the text of the Bible is not written to me. Yeah. What did somebody say the other day? I'm not going to remember the quote. Somebody had a really good quote about that, and I can't remember what it was. Much opposed to the Christian tradition I grew up in. Is there anything we're able to apply for us? And how do we know when those times are? Is there a better question I can have in my mind when reading to avoid misinterpretation? Somebody happens to be working on a book right now about this very thing. Currently scheduled to be released February 7th of 2023. That will likely change, but that's its current release date. I need to get some edits back to the publisher, but wanting to deal with this very question. So Let me take this. Is there anything we are able to apply for us? Hopefully, all of it. But that's the work of biblical hermeneutics, and that's the work of biblical study, is figuring out how to apply it, which is really what your question is. Is there anything just because the Bible's not written to me does not mean it's not relevant. It's all relevant to me, and it all should be applied in my context, into our context. Um, but it doesn't mean that it's written to me. And that's your hermeneutical question. So then you ask, how do we know when those times are? Is there a better question I can have? So that better question that I'm going to try to talk about and equip with some of the things we talk about in my book, ask the question of communicative intent or authorial intent. What is the intent of the author? The question we want to be asking ourselves when we read any part of the Bible is, who is the author and who is the audience? And what is the conversation that's taking place between author and audience? Because that's the inspired conversation. And that's not to say that God can't speak outside, like the Holy Spirit can do whatever the Holy Spirit wants to do. God can speak in any way, in any mystical way. I love contemplation. I love how the Holy Spirit can work out. But as far as biblical hermeneutics, the conversation we want to be asking when we're interpreting the scripture is, what is the conversation between author and audience? That's the inspired conversation. That's the authoritative conversation. If I can understand what Paul was saying to the church in Philippi, if I can understand what the psalmist is trying to do for the people of God, if I can try to figure out what the chronicler, or say the author of Jonah, is doing for his audience, if I can understand that conversation between author and audience, then I can take what that conversation is teaching, and then I take that principle or that understanding or that lesson, or that Jews would use the word meaning, take the meaning of that story, pull it over into our context, and now go, how do I apply that meaning? How do I apply the meaning of the inspired conversation into my current context? And in that question, which isn't always easy to answer and is full of complexity and nuance and complications, and we're 2,000 years, 3,000 years on the other side of history in a completely different culture, and the world has moved on in so many ways. But if I can understand that biblical conversation, and then do the hard work of going, what is the meaning of that story, or the meaning of that passage, or the meaning of that teaching? How does that apply to my current situation? That's the work of biblical hermeneutics and biblical application. And there shouldn't be and some of the parts of the Bible are going to be a whole lot easier that gap's going to be a lot shorter than other parts of the Bible, but that's the work. That's the work. And that's what we try to be all about on the podcast. But nevertheless, I digress. Could you expand on the fact that what matters most to God is our actions toward others, and not really the smaller things like whether you lied or got drunk? Great question. And I love how you phrase that and where you're headed. Your head's in the right spot. Um, Morality, I think what Jesus was here to try to teach us. You can read the Gospels and try to pull this apart for yourself. But I feel like what Jesus tried to come and teach us was, because religious people always do the same things with all. So Judaism of the what we call the Old Testament, Judaism of history, or New Testament Christianity, wherever you find religion organizing itself, and that's not all evil, it's just a natural byproduct of that organization. We love to turn morality and religious practice into an abstract, arbitrary moral code. It's what the priests had done to the temple system. It's what the Pharisees had done at a particular point in history, not by and large, but there is a part of Jewish history where the Pharisees were pointed towards a legal observance and a devotion to following a moral code. We love to turn morality into an arbitrary morality code, a holiness code, when in fact what those very codes are trying to teach us. You can even go back to Leviticus and show what Leviticus is trying to teach a very ancient people about how to think, not what to think. Leviticus is not a list of a whole bunch of things. That's what you think when you see it. That's what a lot of people kind of like have been taught about Leviticus. Leviticus is not trying to teach you what to do or what to think. It's trying to teach you how to think, how to rule, how to, I don't mean rule like rule as a king. I mean, make a ruling, make a judgment, make a discernment. Leviticus is trying to teach God's people how to think, not what to think. So, and now I've lost my question even here. So is morality is not just like an arbitrary God just made up rules and that's the code. And because God's God, there's a reason behind why morality is moral. And the reason for that is not because of some static, abstract, Greek Platonic choice of God out in the, out in the nether, the divine nether somewhere. It's it's that actions and choices have an impact on people. It or even not even people, creation. The things, the decisions we make, the actions that we have, it has an impact on relationships. It disrupts shalom. Those relationships can be with other people. Those relationships can be between you and God. Those relationships can be between you and creation. Those relationships can be between you and yourself, I think, when you think about healthy psychology, um, being emotionally, mentally healthy. Shalom is when everything is in its proper place. And so morality is this thing that disrupts shalom. And so something is immoral because of the impact it has on another human being. So when you say, can you expand on the fact that what matters most to God, and it's not that actions involving other people matter more than drunkenness, because drunkenness is talked about in the Bible. But why is drunkenness talked about in the Bible? Because of its impact on shalom, because of its ability to disrupt shalom and relationships and take something that's straight and make it crooked. And that's the same thing for issues of whether it's issues of justice and how we pursue economic realities or farm our fields or our sexuality or even things like why did God ask his people to wear a certain clothing or farm their fields with only one seed? Or why are these? Because what God's trying to teach his people is that the things that we do impact other people. And it either straightens what's been made crooked or it takes what's straight and makes it more crooked. And that's that concept behind morality. I teach that a whole lot better with a whiteboard, apparently, than I do on a live stream. But there you go. Okay, let's see here. You and Brent are the best. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Susan. What do you think about Reed Dent? Oh, she doesn't say anything about Reed. That's too bad. That's just a joke. Reed's here today. That'll be funnier later. Hold on. You just hold on to that, everybody. You hold on to that. It'll be funnier later. I love your show. Question about prophets. Names with Yahoo at the end of it instead of Aya, like Aya or Isaiah or Josiah or Jeremiah. When you say it in the Hebrew, you say Yirmiyahu, Yirmiyahu, instead of Jeremiah. That's how you'd say it in the English. In the Hebrew, Yirmiyahu. Is that just a funny thing you do? And the answer is yes. So the Aya, or the Aya, Jeremiah or Isaiah, it's the at the end of it is actually a reference to the name of God. It's that Yah, the Yah is the part of their name that says to Adonai. And so in the Hebrew, when you say it, and I don't know if it's actually, this is where my expertise is going to fall flat on its face. At this point, I'm no longer an expert. So I don't know if they have decided to put the Yao on the end of it so that it doesn't say Yah, or I don't know if that's because that's actually what's being said and pronounced. I'm not aware in my Hebrew studies yet of anything in the actual writing of the name that does that, but maybe. But yes, that's a difference in the Hebrew and how you would say it in the Hebrew. Marty, are you familiar with Dr. Jordan B. Peterson's biblical series teachings? I am. Is there a danger to study Bible from a psychological perspective? I don't know. I'm not a major fan of Jordan Peterson. I don't necessarily have a major problem with Jordan Peterson. The dude's obviously brilliant as all get out. That's not the hermeneutic that I'm using. I would say that hermeneutic could be dangerous, but my hermeneutic can be dangerous. Any hermeneutic can be dangerous. And what I don't want to do is I don't want to say, well, that person, you shouldn't be listening to that person. No, 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 no. I hate it when people do that. I hate it when people are like, oh, those people, you can't listen to that person. That person's dangerous. That person's a false teacher. That person's a heretic. Well, then their teachings will be garbage. Um, some bits or pieces here I may not agree with, but I hate it when people say, "Oh, I wouldn't be listening to that person." Do I have teachers that I don't like? Yeah, sure. Do I have teachers that I do like? Yes, sure. And do those align with everybody else's? No, they don't. Not all the time. Jordan Peterson is not one of my favorites. It's not a hermeneutic that I'm drawn to. Um, that's all I'm going to say about that. Because yeah, sure, a lot of people listen to him and get a lot out of him, and he makes us think critically. Sweet. There you go. There we go. Brent Billings doing his work. Doing his work. All right. Let's see. I'm going to go to the live stream here next. Oh my goodness. Let's see. Is Brent trying to talk to me? No. That was Reed trying to talk to me, but we're going to ignore that. All right. Let's go to a live stream. What kind of questions we got in here? Hello and good evening. Hello and good evening. I think you've been sneaking. Oh, that was Brent that said that. I mean, every now and then. But now I'm out. I'm out, Brent. I have no more cough drops, no Jolly Ranchers, no mints, nothing. Nothing to disrupt our beautiful recording with. Hello from San Antonio, Texas. Got to get to Texas. Don't know when it's going to be. It's not on my calendar for 2022. But 2023, I hope to make my way on down to Texas. That'd be fun. Hi, Brian Trushinger. The Trush. He's our new hire with the Bayma team. Brian is new full-time. He's a strategy coordinator. So Brian's helping me keep my eyes on stuff that I'm just too busy to see, too busy to think about. And Brian's going to help us keep making Bayma better. Bayma better. I'm only here for 30 minutes, so if anyone needs help, oh man, she only got a few more minutes with Brent, everybody. Don is on sabbatical. Hi, Don. Hey, Don, we go to Israel on Saturday. Well, I head to Chicago on Saturday. We go to Israel on Sunday. Headed to Israel, everybody. I read Prophetic Imagination in college 20 years ago. I should read it again. Yes, you should. Thanks for offering up that suggestion. Absolutely. Lois Turberg books. What is your take on Satan, the devil? Yeah. It's a good question, and there's a ton of conversation that swirls about that. So the word shatan, hashatana. Oftentimes it will have the article with it. The Satan, hashatan, and the word literally means the accuser or opposition. It's not like a proper noun. It's not a name. It's not a character. In fact, if your translators, in my opinion, if your translators are doing their job well, the only place in the Hebrew scriptures, the only place in your Old Testament where Satan actually is mentioned as a character is the book of Job. That's it. Because in the Hebrew, the word's just literally a word. It's not a proper noun that's used as a name. You should just be translating it as the opposition, the accuser. Now, it can definitely have some diabolic overtones or be personified that way, but I always love to really look at what the scriptures are doing. Now you get to the New Testament and you start looking in the Greek, and they're definitely what's the word I want to use? I don't want to say toying with. I mean, I do, but I also would say they are utilizing, that's not the word I was looking for, but it'll work for now. They are putting to good use the satanic personification, the character, the person of Satan. They're using that in their stories. And we have to wrestle with what we think about that personification. Its literal um, existence as an entity. Is it the personification of something and that's it? All those kinds of things. What I find most interesting is that that shows up as a construct at a certain point in history. And prior to the Hellenistic period, so prior to the early Greek period, philosophy and all that stuff, prior to that, the idea of Satan in that construct doesn't exist. And so those are the things that I find interesting as I wrestle with that. I'm not going to answer that or resolve that for you. I have my own personal opinions here or there. And you might say, Marty, that's why I come to the live stream, to ask you those things. And yet, again, this isn't about the Q and the A. It's more about the Q's and helping us think and ask good questions. And what Marty thinks is really not near. I'm not an expert. I've read a lot, but I'm no more. I don't have letters after my name. There are other people that might be able to give a much more educated opinion than me. My opinions are much, it's kind of like going back to the same, like what to think versus how to think. I'm much more interested in helping us ask good questions, myself included, and constantly challenge myself about how to think rather than resolving that and telling me what to think. So there you go. Everybody listening to my voice, they're at a different spot along the journey. And I've been studying, reading a lot of stuff to get where I'm at now, and I'm still behind a lot of other people, and I'm at a particular point. And not everybody is at that. They haven't all gotten to the same spot, got on the same journey. And so I have to hold that. I have to steward that well, right? We all do. We all do. We should comment on Facebook less. We should share stupid tweets less. We should listen and ask more questions more. That's what we should do. Yes, let's see here. Paul, thank you for your work. It has helped me more than you can know or have given me words to describe where my mind has been living in a world not enough plenty to trust. Yeah, absolutely. You're welcome, Paul. Thanks for your kind words. No condemnation, just do what is right, helping be okay with what's wrong, because I will be ready to change when God shows me, not trying to control what the story is, not mine, not the potter. Helps me to remove anxiety. Yes, 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 yes. Yep. Are you familiar with the Bible as literature? The Bible as lit podcast? No, that's not one I have. No, I love the Bible for normal people with Pete Enns, but Bible as literature, I have not necessarily heard of that one. That's awesome. I love that. Dawn's on her treadmill. 5 days until we leave. John Jackson, do you feel physically ready for Israel? I've heard you talking about all the walking you're doing while you're there. This trip, my first trip, is the low contact version, so I'll be fine for this trip. This one's like we're shooting for 1 to 3 miles of hiking a day. This is for folks that can't hike, cooler temperatures. So this isn't the trip I'm concerned about. I need to keep preparing myself. I need to keep preparing myself. I started doing back in January. Some people asked me about this. We were going to start doing these 50 burpees a day for 50 days. And so the day before we started, I thought I'm just going to do a rep of 10. Just get some 10 burpees in. My wife is like a total gym rat. She freaking loves this stuff. She could do burpees. She'd do 100 burpees a day if she wanted. She's awesome. So I get like 2 burpees in, and I like throw my shoulder out, trying to pull this 265-pound carcass off the floor and just bounce right up into a jumping jack. Ooh, did not go well. So I had to take a week to recover from doing 2 burpees. I'm getting old. And so what I did instead was I went back to my 50 squats a day, 40 push-ups, and 80 crunches, which has been really good. Like loosening my body up I'm feeling good. I need to start adding a whole bunch of walking. I need to start adding some miles. And the problem with that is miles takes time, and I don't have the time. But when I get back from Israel, I need to keep walking, because Turkey's going to be a little bit more than my first trip. and then full contact Israel in August, and I need to have my butt in gear by the time August gets here. So I appreciate you asking, John. Keep showing up every month at my Q&A and ask me that question. How is your physical prep going? It's going. I don't know if it's going fast enough, but we got started. We're good for now. Got to keep moving. We're not good enough. In your personal studies, besides Rabbi Foreman, who is your favorite rabbi to study? There are some non-rabbi, there are like some Jewish academics like Abraham Joshua Heschel that I'd be like, yeah, that's awesome. But the other rabbi that I would say I'm leaning into more and more and more is Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. Recently passed away, um, but he was one of the leading rabbis of this modern age. Some of his work, Covenant and Conversation, is his book on Leviticus. It's phenomenal. Um, the teachings I've listened to him do are just something else. So yeah, Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, not a believer, um, as far as Jesus goes, but just an amazing Jewish teacher. So that'd be my answer to that. Let's see here. What about James, where it talks about the devil seeking whom he may devour? Yeah, sure. Yeah, yeah. There are some passages in the New Testament, Laura, that reference that. And the question is that how literal do we take that? Is that a personification of evil? Um, is that a literal character? And some people listening to my voice right now are like, yeah, absolutely it is. What kind of a question is that? Okay, sweet. Some people are like, are you serious? Like, no, of course not. Okay. Yep. So we think about those things and we wrestle with those things and we have our own experiences and our stories and we have our theology and all these things that shape what we understand. And yeah, it's good to ask the questions. What program do y'all use to record the podcast in? And what program do y'all edit the audio in? Now that I've moved, the conversation is facilitated by Zoom, and we have a backup recording that I don't think have ever had to use, but we have that backup recording in case we need it. But Brent and I both record locally into GarageBand. Brent takes those GarageBand files, edits them up, gets them done. That's what we're doing. Pretty simple. Um, Brent would have to tell you more about the actual setup we have. We have the Heil PR40s. I have a really old but a really nice uh, Onyx soundboard over here, 5-channel soundboard. Brent has a smaller one that's at his place. Yeah, that's what we do. So I love that question. Nice, practical. How do you navigate the? Oh, looks like Brent might have even answered your question further down. Who knows? How do you navigate the tension between what you teach and thoughts about that you adopt over the years and through teachings in different liturgies from churches that might differ from it? Is it clear? How do you navigate the tension between what you teach and thoughts that you adopt over the years and through teachings in different liturgies from churches that might differ from it? If I understand your question, um, I try to remember that being in community with other believers in all kinds of different settings is a spiritual discipline that makes me better, holds me accountable. Um, so that's part of I love to sit and I want my home church, like I want my home fellowship to be in a place that's super comfortable and kind of week after week edifying and offers a place of belonging, makes me more loving, um, shares the love of God with me, reminds me of the love of God, reminds me to be more loving. I want that to be most true. But I love stepping into, and I know that people don't get this, but I love stepping into a Catholic setting. There's so much I can learn from the Catholic tradition. It's not my home tradition, but I love stepping into Greek Orthodox. I love stepping into a Lutheran worship service. I love visiting a Baptist church. I love and of course, in all those settings, even the ones that I call home every week, I'll hear things that, yeah, I don't agree with. Yeah, yep, yep, yep. And yet, that's good for me. It is good to be reminded that other people see things differently than you do, assume things differently than you do. It's a good reminder to be reminded what normal evangelical theology is. It's good for I'll just speak personally. It's good for me to have to be quiet to practice submission as a spiritual discipline because I'm a type 8 Enneagram. I'm narcissistic. I have tendencies to be more narcissistic when I'm unhealthy. And the larger community of God's people reminds me that like you're not. And again, I'm back to the Lenten meditation. I'm really not that significant. I'm here and I'm here to do my part and to play my role and to use my voice and to push the kingdom forward and to partner with God. But so is everybody else. And who am I? Who am I to think that I have the corner on theology? Who am I to think that I've got it all right? Who am I to think that I see it correctly, even most of it? So I have to be reminded. And it reminds me to see other people. So for me, church is a discipline. Now, I don't want to have to be like, to have to just sit there and just go through hell every Sunday. But that's not typically been my experience. And if it is, it'll be time for me to leave. But that's especially now. I love the church I'm at now. I love it. I love it. Such a beautiful place with beautiful people. And I leave there with a sense of like, yes, like a little spiritual renewal. And that's a nice change of pace because often I leave church going, I'm just frustrated. But even that frustration can be good. It reminds me that I'm not the one running the show. There's other people here. And I'm accountable to all of them as brothers and sisters in Christ. So there you go. Do you have a routine you try to follow while on the road? Or maybe not a routine, but maybe certain things you try to do while traveling? When I'm traveling, I'm a socially anxious person, right? So when I'm traveling, my discipline is to not engage my disciplines because I get socially stressed out really, really easy. And so when I'm on the road, my discipline is to simply be open and flexible. And that sounds ridiculous because some of you are like, what are you talking about? For me, that is a huge discipline for me to be like, I'm going to open myself up. I'm going to relinquish control because I don't know what's going to happen. This isn't my home. This isn't my place. This isn't my church. I can only control so much on my calendar. And so when I travel, I try to be like present. My goal and my routine is to do things that make me present. And that's what my on the road my on the road retreat routine is to not have a routine, but to simply be open at every moment from the moment that I wake up to the moment that I go to bed, to be open to those people around me, to listen to my own spiritual thermometer and to know when it's time for me to step back, disengage, lean in, lean back, those kind of things. Good question. Brent's gone. Chris McNaught. What are you doing in my comment thread, Chris? I love that. Marty, my friend. You are my friend, Chris. Man, it's good to hear. Good to hear from you. Read your comment. I assume your journey to Judaism began while you were pastoring at Twin Falls Reformed Church. How did that journey begin for you? I won't give too much of an explanation there. I don't tell that story on too public of a, it's just weird and it can be a little tender. And right now, I actually have a whole bunch of people. I've had to set up some boundaries because there's a recent book that came out. It's causing everybody to ask me a whole bunch of questions about who I am and justify your Judaism and a whole bunch of stuff that I don't necessarily owe them. Now, that's not what Chris is asking me to do, but it's a little tender right now, me sharing my story because it's my story. And it's not for anybody else to judge. But it did begin when I was there at Twin Falls. That's when I started being able to go study over with Ray. I was already learning when I took the job and started at Twin Falls Reformed. And then Ray only helped like give me a bibliography, hone my focus. He was just really a blessing. And during that study, he introduced me to a new perspective on Paul, which we go over in session 4 of the podcast. He He taught me all about the Judaism of the New Testament and what was happening in that context, that Jews were Jews and Gentiles were Gentiles. And the scandal of the New Testament is that these two people coexisted in the church, in this family, this household that Ephesians talks about in chapter 2. Jew and Gentile together, and Gentiles weren't supposed to become Jewish, and Jews weren't supposed to throw off their Judaism, but the gospel brought the two together in the same at the same table. And I got that. And when I was at Twin Falls, I was actually quite adamant as I taught in different spaces. Like, our goal is not to be Jewish, because there it was always trendy for people to, when you teach this stuff, like, I want to do the festivals, I want to eat kosher, I want to, and A, no, you don't, and B, that's Paul's pretty adamant in the book of Galatians. Like, when you do that, you mess the gospel up, because the gospel is about Jew and Gentile being together. There is no Jew or Greek, slave nor free, male or female. That whole argument in Galatians, 6 chapters of an argument. And so I was like, I was on board. And then I went to Turkey. It was my last trip with Ray, and I had grown my beard out just to be stupid. No reason. Becky told me to grow it out. I did. Just being dumb. And I walked around the corner of the airport, and Ray turned around and he looked at me and he went, "Oh my goodness, I'm such an idiot. You're Jewish." And I was like, "Well, that's kind of a weird thing to say." Like, I knew of my family's Jewish heritage. My dad comes out of a very strict LDS household, and and uh, and because of that, we have our family genealogy. Takes me back to 938 AD. I knew of some of our Jewish heritage. Our family crest over in England has a palm frond and a shofar in it. Like, I was aware. My name is a Jewish name coming out of Western Europe. Like, I knew of my Jewish heritage. I just never thought about its relevance to my own journey. And so uh yeah, I came home, and it was right about the time I was transitioning out, Chris, from Twin. That was when my wife we spent that last year reading through Torah. And Ray was beautiful. Like, Ray didn't tell me what I had to do. Ray was like, "Listen, in Jesus, I think you have all the freedom in the world. But I know what you teach, and one day you're gonna have a student that's paying attention, and they're gonna look at you, and they're gonna say, 'If that's what you believe, why don't you eat kosher?' And you just need to know what you're gonna tell them." I just never thought about it. And so I came home and had a really awkward conversation with my wife, and, we spent that year reading through Torah, talking about it, and at the end of that time, she came and said, "I think that's what we should do." And so, as we moved, it was a great time and a great transition. We were just having children, and we picked up our Jewish heritage and became Torah observant. And so, yeah, it's weird. When I go back home to Twin today, I don't wear my tassels, because they don't know me as that Marty, and I don't want the weird Judaism thing to get in the way of Jesus and our relationships. So I just tuck my tassels in. It's not a big deal. I'm not here to be a Jew. That's not my point. I'm here to follow Jesus with people that love Jesus. But since I've moved, people on the other side of that life only know me as the Marty that I am today. And so I do. That's about all I'll say about the story. And yeah, I'm just trying to do my best. And there are people out there right now writing me messages and chucking stones, and that's cool. That's cool. I'm gonna do my best to forgive that and delete those messages. And it's just, yeah, I get it. Okay, so you think I'm doing it wrong? That's okay. I'm trying to steward my life to the best of my convictions, and maybe I'm doing it wrong. And if I ever become convinced that, I'll change. I'll change. I'm always going to try to live consistent to what I believe the Bible teaches, what Jesus calls me to do. So there we go. Yeah, that was kind of good. It was kind of healing for me to say, because I also don't want to hide it. I don't want to act like, "I don't know, Chris. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know. What are you talking about, Chris?" No, I want to be able to tell my story in the right ways, in the right spaces. It's a part of what it means to be, I don't know, transparent, humble, accountable. I'm doing my best. And I think that's what most of you listening to my voice are doing. You're doing your best. You're studying the Bible, following Jesus, and trying to live consistently. And a lot of us are coming to different conclusions about things. That's okay. It's a part of it. Just follow Jesus. I'll keep following Jesus. You do the same thing, and we'll all figure it out in the end. Oh, let's jump over to another platform. What do? Facebook? Let's grab, what else do we got? I'll go to Twitter. What? Here's the only one that came in on Twitter. From Michaela, Marty, what is your favorite part of Purim? Purim starts tomorrow night. 2 nights. Night one's tomorrow, and then the next night is the closing night of Purim. What's my favorite part of Purim? I'm going to answer that in 2 questions, 2 parts. One, there's just like what part of the Purim celebration is my favorite? It's the fact that it's just a party. Like it's the most party-y party of the festivals. And it doesn't mean there's no depth, and there is depth and meaning to the content of the festival, but it's just a huge party. By a lot of people's standards, it's the biggest Jewish party of the year. And I love that part of it. It's kind of like this is probably a sacrilegious connection to make, but it's kind of like the Jewish version of Halloween. You get to get dressed up in costumes. It's a whole bunch of fun. You eat a bunch of good food. You drink a bunch of good drink, and you just have like this amazing time. That's my favorite part of Purim. A lot of festivals sometimes, especially as the dad, I feel like I'm carrying all this weight of what we need to accomplish and the task of the like Passover. Like what an amazing festival. And yet there's a weight to what we're doing. There's a significance and importance to the task at hand tonight. Why is this night different than all other nights? That's a thing, right? Um and and so what I love about Purim is that there's not a whole lot of that weight. And we usually get to share that, and the other favorite part of the holiday is what I've learned about the content and the story. It's just so good. So, if anybody's curious, you need to get the book, The Queen You Thought You Knew by Rabbi David Foreman. The Queen You Thought You Knew by Rabbi David Foreman. It is a phenomenal book. It will blow your mind, and you will learn so many things about the book of Esther and the story of Purim that you never even it is so good, and I am still year after year going back to that book, going back to that well, and learning new things from it. It is so good. So, this year, I'm super excited because it's just gonna be my family. Sometimes we will invite friends over or students to come be in our festival space, and this week for Purim, it's just my family, and we've got some really cool family discussions. We're gonna learn from Esther. We're gonna learn from the story of Esther with some of the things that my kids have been going through at school, elementary school and middle school, and they've been going through some stuff. And we're gonna look at Esther, and we're gonna be like, Esther was why is this all get out? Like she was amazing and she was brilliant. And let's learn from Esther about the kind of people that we are being called to be. So I love Purim too. It's just a cool teaching story. Um, let's see here. What else do we got? Let's go to Instagram. Instagram. 7 questions. As pointed out early in the podcast, there were a lot of flood stories in the ancient Mesopotamian culture. Indeed, there was. That predate the biblical flood story, which implies that the Noah story might be an adaptation of a familiar story to the intended audience, not a literal account of a flood that destroyed the world. That's absolutely a very, very good possibility. It's also possible, I say this in the podcast, that all of those flood stories exist because there's some shared cultural memory. So there may have also been a literal event, and that's why all those cultures have a story about a flood. That's also possible. It's also possible that the image of a flood is very rooted in ancient mythology and makes so it could be, yeah, it could be all the above. Doesn't have to be one or the other. I don't know any more than anybody else does, but we're now asking a better question rather than did the flood happen? Why is the story of the flood being written? So we're asking that question. Now we're asking better questions. Maybe it did happen. Maybe it didn't. That's not the point. Considering that and how many questions the historicalness of all the other stories that make up the preface, Genesis 1 through 11, what are we to do with the genealogies of Genesis that connect Adam to Noah and eventually to Avram and his family? I guess I struggle in understanding the point in connecting all these people to one another, especially if some were unlikely to be real people that lived. Okay, so let's start here. We'll start with Michael's question. We're going to start with this idea. So if it was a literal record, what's the point of that? What's the reason for that? And I get that we might say so that we have a literal record. Okay. And what's the reason? Why see, we have the same problem. We have the same problem whether it's literal or not literal. So I love to shift it away from whether it's literal, whether it's not literal, whether Satan's literal, whether Satan's not literal. Shift it away from that and ask. So a rabbi, I was recently reading a book, and there was a rabbi that said, Christians read the Bible looking for truth, but Jews read the Bible looking for meaning. And that's what goes on here in these conversations. We have rooted our reference point, our center of gravity is around truth. And so we really struggle with, did this literally happen or not literally happen? And if it's not literal, it somehow loses some sense of value. And I'm not saying whether it did or didn't happen. What I'm saying is I want to shift my center of gravity away from truth to meaning, because that's inspiration. Inspiration isn't connected to historical veracity. Inspiration is connected to the word of God, the meaning that's in the story. So now I want to shift my center of gravity away from its literal historical veracity to why is it there? So whether they did or did not happen, let's ask a new question that dodges both of those issues and say, why are those genealogies being written? Why are they wasting the literary real estate? And let's ask those questions. And when you start to look at it, you realize, well, there's different sets of genealogies in Genesis 1 through 11. First of all, there's Cain and Abel, and there's the Cain line, and then there's spoiler alert, Abel dies. So then Seth becomes the other line. So you have Seth's line and Cain's line. And you can follow those lines, and depending on how far into a more Jewish allegorical reading, like Jewish mysticism is going to be highly out. They're going to say that every name is allegorical. It stands for something. Every number, every age is allegorical. And some people might say, it's going a bit too far. I think I'm I don't know. I don't know really what to do with that. I do believe that those two lines are trying to tell me something other than give me a literal record. There is a line, 7 generations, that ends with a statement about me being avenged 7 times 7. So 7 generations, there are 7 generations, and it ends with vengeance. It starts with evil and the murder of Abel, and ends with pure evil and pure vengeance. 70 times 7, vengeance. 70-fold, 77s, vengeance. The other line goes to 10 generations and leads to Noah. And he will save us. He will comfort us he will give us rest in the labor of our hands. So there is a lesson not just a record, there's a lesson. Where does evil come from, and where does it end? And where does righteousness come from, and where is its end? That's a sermon. That's a lesson. There's meaning in those genealogies. If you go to the later set of genealogies, well, isn't it weird that every one of those names is a people group? They call it the Table of Nations because these genealogies lead to an explanation at the time of its being written of where all those people groups are from. Where'd that group come from? Why is that group so evil? Where did they come from? And when you look at their genealogy, you realize, oh, well, that group came from the curse that Noah put on Canaan because of what Ham did. Again, vengeance. So where does vengeance lead? Vengeance leads to evil. When you don't put vengeance into the hand of God, there's meaning in those genealogies. It's not just telling me whose son was whose. It's telling me that because Noah had a moment of pretty just blackout failure and just utters a damning curse on his grandson, you now have international conflict. And the point of Genesis is don't go down the road of vengeance because it never leads to restoration. Let God deal with the vengeance. We need to pedal in forgiveness. That's what we need to major in forgiveness because that puts you see these genealogies, they have meaning, and that's what they're there for. Not just to keep a historical record, but because they're teaching us something about life. How can a Bema Podrishner Gentiles encourage and grow respect for Jewish spiritual roots and historical context in Scripture at their local church? Well, don't be obnoxious and make your local church hate you. You could start a Bema group, but they may not be cool with that. So, I mean, I don't know. Um, but you could do that. You could do a book club where you read. Yeah, and I don't know if Rachel, you were here for the earlier part of our Q&A, but we talked about books that are accessible and a great place to start. You could do like a book club, a book study with a small group or whatever. You could even do it with church staff if they wanted to. That's cool. Um, and read like Lois Tuerberg's books. And but yeah, you could do a Bema group. You could listen to the podcast. You could um, just don't try to force it. Don't try to take people on a journey they're not ready to go on. There's no way that your whole church there's no church where everybody's gonna be ready to go on the same journey, at the same time, at the same speed, in the same way. Yeah, don't force that. It'll just be dysfunctional and divisive. Some people are looking for that. Some people are wanting to ask those questions. And when they do, good. Have some tools and find the people that are asking those questions. And there's a whole bunch of people that aren't asking those questions, and that's okay. That's okay. Like Jesus has got that. He's got it. We'll be all right. I'm a young youth pastor in New Zealand. Woohoo! 21 years old. What is a piece of advice that you would tell your 21-year-old self? What is one of your most important things you would be teaching the next generation of teenagers? Man, I don't know what I would have told my 21-year-old self because my 21-year-old self wouldn't have listened. I would have told my 21-year-old self to quit being so arrogant, quit being so narcissistic, go to therapy now rather than 4 years from now. You're going to save yourself a whole lot of heartbreak. Um, but my 21-year-old self wouldn't listen to that because I knew everything. And I'm not the person that's doing a live stream now. My 21-year-old self was a jerk. He's worse than that, but I can't use that language here. He's worse than that. Man, I don't know what I'd tell him because he wouldn't listen. But anyway, what is one of the most important things you would be teaching the next generation of teenagers? It's a good question. It's a good follow-up question, Zeke. Um, man, I'd be teaching my young people how to think critically, how to ask good questions, and how to follow Jesus. Like honestly, what was I doing at 21 years old? I had just moved out of my, but I was a 20-year-old youth pastor. And you know what I was trying to do? Convince all my students to come to church and grow my youth group and do all this stuff and take over the world and be awesome. And I wouldn't do any of that stuff, man. I would take whatever students were showing up and I would teach them how to follow Jesus. Do you know how to follow Jesus? I'm not talking about like go to heaven. I'm talking about do you know how to pursue Jesus every day? Do you know how to hear his voice? Do you know how to read? Do you know how to make his presence real in your life? And if you know how to hear his voice, when he tells you to do stuff, do you do it? Do you know how to say yes? I would be equipping them and teaching them to do that because Gen Z is going to save us. Gen Z is going to save the church. Gen Z is going to recreate so many of the things that are broken, and we got to be equipping them. One of the things that our vice president here at Impact loves to say is we got to be the floor, not the ceiling. Man, if I was 21-year-old youth pastor, I'd be doing a whole lot more being the floor. And I did an awful lot of being the ceiling before. And I would not do that again. And I don't even know what that all looks like because I haven't had to answer that question in a long time. So I haven't had to think about that. So I'll just stop there because I'll just be rambling. How can you tell when you've found a healthy church culture? What are some signs? What are some red flags for unhealthy church culture? All right, I don't want to be stupid and trite, but there's something to this. The fruit of the tree tells you what the tree is. Like Jesus taught that about 3 times in the Gospels. Paul doubled down on it in the book of Galatians. It's a real thing. And we evaluate the orthodoxy of the content rather than the fruit of the tree. And that is not what Jesus told us to do. He told us to look at the fruit of the tree. And if it's love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control, if your church helps facilitate, I mean, that's not the fruit of the church, it's the fruit of the Spirit. But church should facilitate life in the Spirit. So a healthy church culture should make you more loving, more joyful, more patient, more kind. It should make you gentler. It should make you more self-controlled. And if you want to read the paragraph before, Paul says the fruits of the flesh are obvious. Fruits of the flesh are obvious. Fits of rage, division, debauchery, malice, envy. Now, that's not some heaping condemnation of like, go leave your church because they're all broken. Like, no, no, no. What's the sign of good, healthy church culture? The fruit of the Spirit. What's a sign of a dysfunctional church culture, an unhealthy church culture? You got a bunch of people super angry, super divisive, super envious. Um, so that's what I would say. My church needs to make me more loving. My church needs to share the love of God with me and help equip me to share the love of God with others. And I mean the love of God, not the doctrine of God, not like the evangelism program. I mean like the church needs to be about love. Like it actually makes me a more loving person and shows me the love of God and facilitates the love of God. That's what healthy church looks like. That's what it should do. It should do that. Um, I feel like I had one more thing I wanted to add to that. Can't think what it is. My mind went blank. Maybe that's the Holy Spirit saying, don't say that. I have a deaf child, and I read the story of Jesus healing the deaf man in the Bible, and he wanted the same healing. The child did, I believe, in this comment. In deaf culture, that's largely a big no-no. But God had to help me understand that if he did it in Scripture, then there is nothing wrong with that. In our modern context, how should we view the stories of healing in the Bible? Is it okay to have a hope expectation of a physical thing, a physical healing, or was the purpose in Scripture something else beyond that? Is there a deeper lesson I should be helping my son draw from that story? I'm going to go backwards and get to the most meaningful part of it by going backwards. So, is there something else beyond just the physical healing in those stories? Yes. We'll go over that in session 3. I don't think the point of the miracles is the actual miraculous part of the miracle. Miracles are problematic. I think the miracles of Jesus, what I mean by miracles are problematic is Jesus would have like been never ending fixing everybody's problems. He didn't come here to fix all our problems and heal. So when engages in those healing miracles, they're teaching opportunities. It's a rabbinic teaching tool. And so we'll go over that in session 3. Very recently, only a few weeks ago, we had on session 6, Kevin Chandler, who's a part of something called We Carry Kevin. And he has a condition that kept his body from developing, and he has a wheelchair, and then his friends carry him around all over the world in a backpack. And he has some really interesting perspective on healing and what the real miracle is. Is the real miracle a healing, or is the real miracle that he has a life full of friends that have given up everything to be there for him, to meet him in the morning, to take him to the shower, to help him use the restroom, to roll him over in the middle of the night, and then to have fun, to put him in a backpack and to take him all over is that the miracle? Is friendship the miracle? And it's not either or, but we don't want to forget like there are these miracles, but then there might even be wider miracles, bigger miracles. I don't want to say better miracles. I just want to say different miracles that we don't want to miss. Then there's a part of your question that talks about our desires. And of course, we should be able to share those desires with God. Oh my goodness, yes. Like if your son or you or anybody else ever wants healing and that's what you want, then you cry out for that. Absolutely. Absolutely you do. Um of course you always remember that I mean, you always remember those lessons that we do hear about in all those stories too. But nobody should ever like there's a part of that question that's like, is it okay to give voice? Yeah, it's okay to give voice to that. Like if that's your heart's desire, then you cry out. You let God know that. Not because it's a formula, not because if you cry out and God hears it and this is right and that's right, then healing happens. I mean that's neither here nor there. That's God's prerogative. But you cry out because one of my favorite stories that Ray ever told me is he was over on his trip with his high school students. And one of his high school students had a father that had been in an accident and had become a paraplegic. I don't even know if I'm saying that right. And my apologies if I'm not, but was paralyzed. And so they go to the synagogue and their assignment is they had to draw a passage out of a hat and then they had to give a 90-second derashah, it's what you call a Jewish sermon. Just a reflection. Here's my passage. Here's my 1-minute reflection on that passage. Well, this kid, by the hand of God, draws the story of the paralytic man being healed. And Ray said, of all the derashahs that he's ever heard, it was the most meaningful, the most powerful derashah he's ever heard. He said the kid got up and he read the story of the paralyzed man. And he stepped off the bema and he looked at everybody and he said, Jesus healed the paralyzed man. Jesus hasn't healed my dad, but I know he could. And he sat down. Like, man, that's it. That's it. And I don't know what you do with that. But, whew, man, that's a thing. That's a thing. The best answers are never answers, are they? We got Slack. Let me go back to my live stream. It's past the hour. I'm going to go for another 45 minutes, but I always stop somewhere in here and just say thank you to all of our donors. And anybody that's watched my live streams knows that that's a regular thing for me. And they know that I say that every time. And they also know that I say it's a regular thing for me, but it's not just emotion that I go through. It's something that I say on purpose with intention because it matters. And I'm thankful for it. I have so much gratitude for so many of you that support our ministry financially. So many of you at some of the smallest $10 a month. And there are so many of you, and you're making a huge difference. I pointed out Brian Trushinger. Old Trush I don't know if he's still here, but he was in the live stream earlier. I'm sure he's watching with us. He's getting to work with us because there's so many of you giving $10 a month. And it's just awesome. And I know he's thankful. I know Brent is thankful. I know I'm thankful. We're thankful for your generosity. Thank you for all of you who support our ministry. It means something. It really does. And anybody that is new to our podcast or whatever, or hasn't but wants to be a part of that, just go to our website, find the support, donate link, and figure out how to give. But even the smallest little gifts are making such a new thing for us, and it's such a beautiful thing. So making a big difference. All right, I'm going back to my live stream. What's going on here? Bible as Literature as an Eastern Orthodox priest and his PhD colleague. Oh, cool. Basically doing a deep dive in the literary designs in both Old and New Testament. I don't agree with everything, but it's very solid. Cool. How do you allocate time every day, day or week to writing your book, and how many hours a day, week to go into writing the book? A lot of authors do that. Almost every author that I have been coached by has that approach. They've all acknowledged it's not the only approach, which is good because it's not mine. So I love to get into one space and focus. So what I did was I went on 2 week-long retreats. I wrote my rough draft. I went on a 7-day writing retreat, and I just put my head down and I wrote my book and I got it done in 7 days. And then I needed to do a bunch of cleanup, and I needed to kind of like fix that rough draft and get it ready to be presented. And I went away for another 6 days and I did another writing retreat and I got it all done. Now I've got the edits back from my publisher, and I'm hoping I can spend 2 days, 2 to 3 days, get it all wrapped up when I get back from Israel, and get it zipped off and get that part taken care of. So that's what I do. I don't do every a little bit every day. I would just go crazy, and I would feel like I'm just getting started, and then I can't finish. So I love to just leave. My writing retreats. I left. I went to another state. I went to Tennessee for my first one. I went to South Carolina for my second, and I just got into a place and I holed up and I just wrote. And that's what I did. So probably does not work for most people, but that definitely worked for me. Yeah, thanks, Laura. Yep, my husband has been binging the podcast, and now I have someone else to talk about. Yeah, that's great. Good. Chris, have you walked the Jesus Trail in Israel? I've heard of it. I don't know a whole lot about it. Um, yeah, I haven't actually walked the Jesus Trail, whatever it is. I'm sure I've done very similar things, but I have scouted my own trails. We walked the Bema Trail. It's got a little bit of Moses. It's got a little bit of Judges. It's got a little bit of Elijah. It's got a lot of Jesus. And then we go to Turkey and we walk the Paul Trail. And we walk the John Trail. And so that's what we do. Besides the Council of Nicaea, where can you find the Trinity in the New World? Well, you can't find the Trinity in the New or Old Testament. I mean, you can maybe find the truths of the Trinity, but you can't find the Trinity mentioned because that was a more Greek philosophical construct as we wrestled with more philosophical truths from a Western perspective when we had gotten rid of the Eastern container. We didn't know what to do. We used to be able to pour the Western thought into an Eastern container, but then we got rid of the Eastern container, and then all we had was the Western thought, and then we had to make these new containers. That doesn't mean they're wrong, just means they were different. So they didn't exist. Those new containers didn't exist in the Old Testament. They didn't even exist in the New Testament. Now, the truths of the Trinity, yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. I'm not going to argue with that. The truths of what we would say are ecumenical orthodoxy, yeah, yeah. Can we ask questions about those? Sure. Yep, of course we can. There's nothing we can't ask questions about, nothing we can't wrestle with, nothing we can't think critically about. Am I going to talk a whole lot about that on a live stream? No. How do we learn? But basically, in case anybody freaks out, like I affirm orthodoxy. I got my feet firmly planted in orthodoxy. I do have a ton of questions, like any of you do. But anyway, how do we learn to do what Paul did in Acts 17 in Athens, using the elements of Hellenistic culture around him to reveal God's truth? I mean, if that was easy to answer, missiology wouldn't be a thing, right? But that is the challenge. That goes back to that same question we had earlier about application. How do you apply this story? And that's what the church is for. That's what the church should. So that goes back to our question about what makes for a healthy church. If the church is making me more loving, if the church is healthy, if the church is helping facilitate the fruit of the Spirit in my life, well, then the program would be to live out the gospel in my context and to work hard to do that. The problem is we're so often everything's reversed. We keep trying to suck all the energy to the church's programs to build an institutional presence and to grow our churches and do all that stuff when the church should be the energy should be going out from it with a missiological focus to live out, to take the gospel into our context. That should be what's involving our time, but we keep trying to draw everything into ourselves. It doesn't work. My definition of being saved is believing loyalty. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, okay. Um, um, uh, what is the name? Matthew Bates has a big work on allegiance. Other people like N.T. Wright have toyed with the ideas of things like loyalty as a good etymological substitute, conceptual substitute to the idea of faith, being saved by faith. Do you have any thoughts on that? Yeah, I think it's a really healthy. I think there is a lot of. I'm not in a place yet where I'm like, yeah, that is the fullness of my understanding now. But there is absolutely a ton of truth to the conversation of in the New Testament, the gospel is inviting people to a different there's a new king and a new kingdom. That's what the gospel is. The gospel is a pronouncement of a new king and a new kingdom. And the New Testament is asking us to put our allegiance in that new kingdom and follow a new king. And it's not a worldly king. It's a slain lamb. It's everything's upside down. It dies to self. It lays itself down on behalf of others. It forsakes all selfish ambition and vain conceit and considers others more important than itself. It is It centers around death rather than the preservation of a false life. It's all so yes, yeah. Allegiance, believing, loyalty, yeah. Yeah, I'm not gonna argue with that. Are there other nuances too? Is that word like all encompassing? I'm not there yet, but I have no arguments against that idea. It's very NT righty. Um, do you have and Matthew Bates is your leading scholar. If you're not familiar with Matthew Bates, and you want to chase that down some more, you can read his thoughts on faith and allegiance. Do you have other heart check practices that would help you keep yourself focused on the things that matter? I mean, that's the work of spiritual formation, right? Those are all those disciplines that I have. It's the community of God's people. It's all those things. There's no one system that if I put in place, I no longer struggle with that focus. Struggling with that focus is the spiritual walk. It is what it means to walk the path. It is what it means to get up every morning, die to yourself daily and follow Jesus, to take up your that is the daily work, right? And so that will never go away. And there's no system or variable that if I change that, that will then go away. But all of those things that we do, all those things that we intentionally do to be involved in a fellowship, a community of fellowship, to engage in the spiritual disciplines, to memorize my text, to spend time in prayer, to all those things that Christians have done for thousands of years. Walking in faithfulness is the antidote to that distraction. Sabbath. My goodness, listen to me. Sabbath. That's why the whole thing is there for. I mean, I've been doing Sabbath now for years, and that doesn't mean I don't miss one here or there. I'm on the road or some church event. But generally speaking, I have observed Sabbath now for years and years and years. Um, nothing, a weekly reset, a weekly spiritual cleanse, a weekly reminder, a weekly truth teller, a weekly focus getter. That's it. It's those disciplines. It's that faithfulness that does the work. What do you do to express fun, play, joy in your life? What in your life right now consistently brings you happiness? As the weather warms up, just there's some really great spaces in the home that I live in and around the and being able to sit outside. The home we purchased here in Cincinnati has a hot tub. I don't think I'm the type of person that would ever go out and buy a hot tub, but it had one. And we had a home like 10 years when we were in Twin Falls, had a hot tub. Like nothing was um I just love that thing, man. I sit out there about every other night. uh, these spaces where I'm able to just like acknowledge the joy is beautiful. What else? I love to hunt. I wish I am trying to reclaim my time. I've been in a really bad place, a dark place as far as my time, my calendar, my schedule, my availability. With the availability I have, I give to my family. and in a good way, in a healthy way. Like I feel good about that. They bring me joy. My family brings me joy. I wish I had a little bit more time that I could use more for myself. I would enjoy things like playing disc golf. I would enjoy things like playing actual golf. I would enjoy things like I have a bowling alley right around the corner. I freaking love to bowl. I didn't even know we had a bowl. My kids have now been there twice. I haven't been over there yet. Haven't even walked through the front door. Um, I do love to play video games. I don't do it a lot. I don't have that kind of time, but I do love to sit at this computer right here, unplug, and play some video games. It's one of my great just like decompressors. My wife and I, we watch. This will probably make everybody upset. That's cool. That's fine. I'm not looking for your permission or your blessing. We love fight night. We watch UFC every Saturday. So we watch the fight night and then we pay-per-view when it's on. And we every Saturday we will order pizza or we alternate. We order pizza and we do frozen pizza. And we order pizza and we do frozen pizza. But we do pizza every Saturday and we watch fight night. That is what that's my wife's thing, and I enjoy it. But my wife loves UFC. She loves it. So that's what we do. And I'm in. I'm in it to win it. Whoo, let's see here. Setting boundaries. Good for you. Yes, it is. Appreciate your friendship and all the kindness you embody. I hope so. I wish I did it even better because I don't do it often with the people I love the most. Isn't that frustrating? Can you talk about the connection between Jewish nation as God's firstborn and the parallel to Christ as the Bechor of new creation? How might this shift thinking in election and predestination? Oh, I'm not even going to touch election and predestination. We're going to get to that in session 4 and talk about how classical medieval theology has probably not done us very many favors there, and those terms don't mean anything like what any of us have defined in the last 1500 years. So we'll get to that in session 4. I won't unpack that on the live stream. Let's see here. But the first question, can you talk about the connection between Jesus's nation as God's firstborn? Okay, so let's start there. Israel was in the Passover, born again. That's not Christian language, that's Jewish language. It's Rabbi Akiva out of Capernaum said that in the Passover, when the Israelites crossed through the Red Sea was a birth canal, and Israel was reborn, born again, as God's firstborn, his firstborn of all creation. What does that mean? It means that they have a double portion of blessing. They also have a double portion of responsibility. So God's firstborn, Bechor, his firstborn, um, the nation of Israel is chosen to have this special intimate relationship with God, a special intimate relationship with God. They go to Sinai, they marry God at Sinai, they take on Torah, they become a kingdom of priests, his most cherished possession, he said in Exodus 19. That's the double blessing. But then there's a double portion of responsibility. They're supposed to go bless all nations, Genesis 12. They're supposed to be a light to the Gentiles, Isaiah. They're supposed to come bring restoration. They're supposed to be not just God's messengers, but they're also supposed to be the message of God into the world. That's the responsibility of a firstborn son. And so what Jesus does is Jesus comes to model that. He comes to incarnate that mission. And that's not, somebody's going to ask me another question here later about replacement theology. Replacement theology says the Jews blew it, so God got rid of them and replaced it with Jesus and his church. I could not think there's in my mind one of the most blasphemous theologies that's out there. Replacement theology. Nothing's more unbiblical in my opinion. That God got rid of the Jews and replaced it with the church. And if that's true, we all better be shaking in our boots because we've done an even worse job than Israel has. But I digress. Don't get me worked up about replacement theology. What Jesus does is he doesn't come to replace something. It's not that God's forsaken the Jews. Paul makes that abundantly clear in Romans 9. Actually, the conversation about predestination in Romans 9, 10, and 11. Paul makes it abundantly clear that God hasn't forsaken Israel. What he's done is he's reminded them of their calling in Jesus. So what Jesus does is Jesus embodies that mission that God's people are supposed to have. He reminds them by living it out. He fulfills that calling, fulfills that mission in his life, ushers in the mission. He like literally ushers in the mission in the kingdom of God of Jew and Gentile together, of all nations being blessed, of the Jews being a light to the Gentiles. That's the mission. Jesus embodies it. Jesus brings it. Jesus inaugurates it. Jesus leaves behind the Holy Spirit to empower it. That's the mission. So there's no replacement. There's simply empowerment and invitation. There's empowerment and invitation for God's people to remember what their call always was, to accept that, to embody that, to be a part of that. And so that's the idea of Jesus being the firstborn of all creation. And I love what Paul says about all creation because it makes it bigger than just people. Like Jesus is the Behor of the whole thing, all of it. Jesus, Paul is going to say in Colossians, is reconciling all things, whether things in heaven or things on earth or things under the earth. Jesus is reconciling all things. All things are reconciled at the cross. All things in Jesus. Jesus isn't just the firstborn of humanity. He's the first fruits. He's the firstborn of all creation. He's going ahead and putting it all back together. Restoration is happening in him. Oh, thank you for showing. Hey, Adam, I see that. Hello. I say hello back. Thank you for showing me a new window, Suzanne. You're welcome. So glad I could catch some of this live. Just finished a meeting. We'll watch the first part once you're done. Awesome. What does Sabbath look like for you? Same 24-hour span, 26 hour, if I do it correctly. 26 hours, an hour before sunset on Friday night and an hour after sunset on Saturday night. Same 26-hour span every week. Yep. For the most part. Like I try to hold it loosely. I try to value people over practice. So if people need me, I'm going to honor people over observe like a ritualistic, this is my calendar. I do protect that part of my calendar. But if I need to let something go in order to love others, I'm going to do that. But yes, Friday sundown to Saturday sundown. And the only thing tricky is when I'm on the road. But some of the beautiful things that have happened, though, when I am on the road, I've started telling like my staff, if I'm on the road for a work engagement with my own folks, my own impact people, is they know, and they've started like protecting that for me. Like that's the day that we'll go to, like, if I'm at my South Bend team, it's going to be Saturday that we'll go to the Notre Dame game, or we're going to do something like more fun as a team and less work. And I love how they've done that to honor me in that way and us. So that's awesome. Shelby, you just got here. Well, good. Then you're here for the best 26 minutes of the whole live stream. And you can catch the other hour and 34 when we're done. All right, I'm going to swing over to Slack because I'm out of live stream questions. I really hope that Reed stuck on this. I'm sure he didn't, but I really hope he stuck on this whole live stream. I saved Slack for last just to see if he would hang on. But let's see here. Because the first question I got was from Reed Dent. If you haven't met Reed Dent, just wait till you get to session 6. Reed is one of my best friends. A lot of people don't necessarily understand the relationship we have because we just endlessly give each other a hard time. So we'll try to curb it a little bit and cool our jets a little bit. Reed loves giving me a hard time. I love giving him a hard time. It's beautiful. So Reed was my first question on Slack. He said, which Bema co-host are you most intimidated by, and why is it Reed? I mean, you just hit the nail on the head, Reed. It's just hard to get you to shut up. You just don't stop talking. The longest episodes we have on record. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. It's clear that he's no longer with us, or else he'd be adding comments to the live stream. So that's a shame. It's a shame. I have a question I just wanted to see how you would answer. If you could never do enough good to earn heaven, how come you can do enough to earn hell? If works can't save you, Why do they condemn you? What a wonderful um, spin of the question. A great philosophical question. And I don't know. I don't know, Tyler. It's a great question. I don't know why they would condemn you any more than they would save you. I don't think I necessarily believe that. Not sure that's how the conversation works, but I really appreciate how you've phrased that question. It's a great question. I think the conversation happening in the New Testament is a conversation about the condemnation where, like, we're already like, if we talk about session like episode 1, trust the story. We're trusting the story because our tendency, we call it human nature, right? Our human nature, our human tendency. If we talk about episode 2, master the beast, like the beast nature in us gravitates towards fear and insecurity. Some would say that's the beastly default. That is literally in us as creatures. We have a fight or flight response. I would say that simply evolves into condemnation in all kinds of forms. The wrath of God, our, as Hebrews puts it, our guilty conscience. That condemnation shows up in so many ways. That condemnation is a given. That's why I can't stand evangelistic techniques that start with trying to tell people how sinful they are. We know that. And I know that there are people out there that argue with that on the premise of it's just a bad argument, and they're right. It is a bad argument. It's just a dumb way to start the conversation. And Jesus doesn't do that anywhere in the Bible. He confronts religious people about their stupidity and sin all the time, but he never has that evangelistic conversation in that way. Um, where was I going with that? There was something I was saying about that. Um, we all know we're well acquainted with condemnation. I don't know why we have to like build some theological argument to get people to affirm that. But we're all well acquainted with wrath. We're all well acquainted with fear and insecurity. There's not a human being alive that doesn't have a guilty conscience. Duh. That's what the gospel is actually trying to get at. So it's not that, like, I love your question. If we can't do enough to get into heaven, why can we do enough to get into hell? I'm not sure. And I know you're being facetious, so you're rejecting the premise of your question too. So would I, because it's not how it works. We already find ourselves in hell, and the gospel is that thing trying to liberate us from that reality. We already find ourselves in a predisposition to let fear and insecurity be the narrative that we live according to. And the gospel says, no, there's something way better than that. And his name is Jesus. And that will change everything for you. And that will bring you liberation and salvation and freedom and illumination. It will change everything about how you see everything in the story. And go tell other people about it, because other people need to hear it too. Daniel, do you think Matthew, I don't even know the answer to this one, Daniel. I was going to look this one up and I didn't get to it. Do you think Matthew 22:21 is a legitimate expression of Dina de Malchuta Dina? I don't even know what that is, Daniel. So I've never heard that expression before, as far as I know. I was going to look up what it was a reference to. And I'm just going to be honest with you. I don't know what it is, so I can't give my opinion about it. My knowledge knows it definitely knows its bounds. You can plumb the depths of this well. That is for darn sure. So yeah, I haven't heard that expression before. I probably should. Matthew 22. I'm going to look it up just to see what's going on here. Matthew 22:21. Man, I'm going to be real bummed if like Matthew hung on this whole live stream just to wait for me to get to his question, only to have me be like, I have no idea what you're talking about. They replied, Caesar's. He said to them, then give to Caesar the things that are Caesar, and to God the things that are God's. Oh. Yeah, I think I do remember the phrase you're talking about, Daniel. I think I remember that when I was reading David Bivens' stuff. I just can't remember it enough to give any commentary on that. I can't remember. It's probably a really good question. I probably should have spent some time. I just didn't get around to it before the live stream started. Sorry. Um, let's see here. In thinking about having a good eye versus a bad eye, ooh, I love that. Is this Logan Daly? It is. How does having a realistic eye come into play? It's a great question. Um, so I think the realistic eye is not necessarily a given because there are a lot of people that don't have realistic eyes. So we're all trying to have a realistic eye, but it's that realistic eye that can see, it can be good or it can be bad. It can be full of light or it can be full of darkness. But we want to make sure, I love your question here. Like as I'm processing it out loud, it's like taking shape. So if you have just a good eye, but it's a naive eye, that's like that's going to be destructive. It's actually not even going to be a good eye. Like ultimately, it's not even a good eye because it doesn't see things for what they really are. It doesn't tell the truth. So we're not looking for a good eye that's naive, and we definitely want to avoid a bad eye in all. I'm wondering, Logan, about the template of the four learners. We're about ready to talk about this on YouTube, by the way. One of my next videos coming up. We talk about the four learners. Here's an example. The four learners. There's a sponge, takes in everything and keeps everything, soaks it all up. There's the funnel, takes in everything and gets rid of everything eventually. There's the sieve, takes in everything and keeps the good. And there's the strainer, takes in everything and keeps the bad. Which one of the learners do you want to be? Well, you don't want to be the sponge. That's no good. You just keep everything. You don't want to be the funnel because then you keep nothing. You don't want to be the strainer because then you only keep the bad. You want to be the sieve who keeps the good. Which learner are you? This is what the four soils. We call it the parable of the sower. It should be called the parable of the soils. Which soil are you? Right? That's session 3. We'll get to that in session 3. You have the slow. I love that people are adding uh, their I'm sponge. Shelby says, I love that. Um, so you have the slow learner, slow doer. You have the slow learner, quick doer. You have the quick learner, slow doer, and you have the quick learner, quick doer. Which one are you? Are you the person that learns really slowly and does really slowly? That's bad. Are you the person that learns really slowly, but once you learn it, you do it very quickly? Yeah, that's better. Are you the person that learns really quickly but does really slowly? That's something. Are you the person that learns really quickly and does really quickly? For the most part, it's going to be great. For learners. I'm wondering here, Logan, about your question. Is there a bad eye, but not a realistic eye? Is there a bad eye that is a realistic eye? Is there a good eye that is a realistic eye? And is there a good eye that is not a realistic eye? Which good eye do we want? Which eye do we want? We obviously want the good eye, and we want the good eye that's realistic. Now, we want to make sure we hold that in a way that's not okay, but realism tempers the optimism. That's not, those two things are not like held in balance. They're not mutually exclusive. Those things are dynamically interwoven. And so to have a realistic eye that sees things for what they really are and chooses to give everything the benefit of the doubt, chooses to be optimistic, chooses to be gracious, chooses to be hospitable, chooses to be full of gratitude, chooses to be open while still being honest and real about what's in front of it. And this, so I'll add this comment and then I'll move on to the next question. This is why the goal is not to get rid of fear. Like sometimes I've given that impression in some of my lessons, like fear is all bad, get rid of fear, just say no to fear. No, no, no. Fear is a good thing, but fear shouldn't drive the car. Fear probably shouldn't even ride shotgun. Fear needs to be along for the ride because fear keeps you from doing stupid things. Fear reminds you of reality. Fear reminds you that there are things that you actually need. Fear reminds you to make calculated, wise, practical decisions. Fear needs to be in the car. Fear just doesn't get to drive or ride shotgun. Fear needs to be in the back seat and for for most of the ride, keep its mouth shut. Like, I need you along, pipe up when I need you, otherwise shut your mouth. Like, that. So that's the same idea of good eye and realism. It's that fear in the car. It needs to be there to remind you, like, don't see this with rosy colored glasses. Like, a good eye, let's not be shallow with our good eye. Let's have substance to our good eye. So I really, really like that question. Oh, I finally finished all the sessions. I'm thinking you might mean 5 sessions, but maybe you mean 6. Maybe you got caught up to real time. But I'm still trying to understand what you teach about replacement theology. I gave some comments on that earlier, right? So, replacement theology, bad. God did not replace the Jewish people. God did not replace the Jewish people. God's covenant with the Jewish people is an everlasting covenant. His plan, he didn't move on to plan B. He's got plan A. And that is that his people are going to be a part of his missional work in the world, that through them he's going to bless all God's people. He's also going to do that through Gentiles. He has expanded that mission project to include both. That's the scandal of the inclusive New Testament community as we understand it through our New Testament. I understand that Jesus didn't intend to start a new religion to replace Judaism. Excellent. Yes. He came to fulfill Torah. Absolutely. The Jews, Gentiles, were united for a short time. Indeed, they were, until about early second century. Early second century. And that then it wasn't a perfect split. Jews and Gentiles still continued to intersect for centuries after, and maybe you could say there was always pockets where they always did, but to this very day, you could say that. But generally speaking, yes, they were together. There was no Christians and Jews. Christians were a part of Judaism. So Christianity was largely, there were pockets that rejected Christianity. That's not the dominant pocket in diaspora Judaism. Most of diaspora Judaism had Christianity within its larger ranks. They were probably seen as the super fringe, super liberal, really inclusive. You're letting the Gentiles in and you're acting like they're one of us, but they existed within a larger Jewish subset. We'll get to that for all of you that aren't in session 4 and 5. We will get to that in session 4 and 5, and I promise I will make my case and explain that. Of course, you may get done with session 5 like Karina and be like, I don't get it. And that's just on me. I'm just a bad teacher. And then for the reasons you go over, they split. Absolutely. In session 6, we're going to recommend a book. We're going to have a 5-episode series on a book called Understanding the Jewish Roots of Christianity. And it's a super great read and goes over some of those conversations will go directly over some of the stuff we're discussing here. So super good. All right. I'd highly recommend it. It's a collection of essays by different scholars, Messianic scholars. How can the two come together again? Most Christians still believe that Jews have to accept Jesus in order to be saved and have eternal life, and Old Covenant is obsolete. We go over all that in session 4. Most Christians do, I would say. Yeah, most Christians, I would say, probably by default believe that. I think that's slowly changing. I think that group is kind of getting more and more people are becoming more and more aware of a larger conversation all throughout evangelicalism and beyond. So I think that's changing, but I also still think that's true. We address all those things and how to see all those things appropriately in session 4, like the obsolete reference in Hebrews. We talk about that. And it's not just Christians, it would also be Jews. So every strain of Judaism, all of them, except for Messianic Judaism, all strains of non-Messianic Judaism, from conservative to liberal, from Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox to traditional to conservative to Reform Judaism, all of Judaism pretty much agrees on Jesus, and all of Judaism would say Jesus isn't the guy. So it's not just the Christian side of the conversation, it's also the Judaism side of the conversation. Somewhere in the middle of it is Messianic Judaism in all of its forms, many of them very problematic forms. Yes, 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 yes. And so your question here, how can the two come back together again? Number one, for me, the practical coming together again is not the goal. That's not the mission. The mission is the kingdom of God, uh, the reality of the gospel. I do believe that that involves God bringing the people of God together, but my goal is not to figure out how to bring the two together again. Now, other people would probably see that differently, and I'm probably moving on that. I am definitely moving more in that direction than I did before because of some of my new relationships with people like Jen Rosner, who's a fantastic, fun scholar that I've gotten to build a relationship with. She's been a great connection. She's introduced me to all kinds of beautiful, wonderful things that are changing my attitude and my outlook. And I still wouldn't say it's the mission. I think God has missions that transcend that, in my theological opinion. The goal is shalom. The goal is kingdom of God. Shalom is, or the goal is tikkun olam. The goal is the age to come. I do think it has relevance for these two groups being together, but I don't think the goal is figuring out how to bring these two groups together. That's just for me. However, I would have said 2 or 3 years ago, I had very little hope that that was even possible, that it was even possible. And now today, I would say I actually see I see a glimmer of hope. And that's a for me, that's a big deal. It's still not my goal. I don't wake up every morning going like, "That's what we got, like, that's we gotta crack that code." I'm super interested in those, like Jen and others who work in that world and are trying. I mean, Jen wrote a book called Healing the Schism. It's excellent. We'll talk about that in session 6 in that same 5-episode series. Um, she has a brand new book coming out right now. It's a little bit more autobiographical, but it's also just an excellent read. But I love her heart to bring the Gentile and Jewish world uh, back together. I do love that. I do think I have way more hope than I used to. Way more hope. So I don't say that to give the impression it's the goal. It's the mission. I think God says there are other missions, and that's going to be something you pick up along the way. Kind of like clean the inside of the cup, and the outside will become clean. But don't worry about cleaning the outside of the cup because then you might miss the end. Like, be about the mission, and along the way, this other stuff happens too. And that doesn't mean that some people won't devote their lives to that unique missional calling, because some will. And I'm very excited to watch what God does with that. I will be very interested to see where that conversation is by the time my life on this earth is done, should Jesus tarry. Um, because I'm just getting more and more interested. And I'm a part of some conversations that are just really, really amazing and beautiful. And they're changing my mind. So do I know how to answer your question, Karina? Nope. That was a really long way of me being like, I don't know. But I mean, you're right. I think you got it. Um, but I would say don't worry about figuring, like, stay on mission. Don't get lost in those weeds too far because there's work that we got to do. There's stuff that we should be doing. All right. Oh, that was all the previous sent in questions. I'm going to look at my live stream comments and then we're going to call it a night. We got 5 minutes left. Um, and why is it Reed? Yeah, I know. I hope he comes back and listens. Longest and most listened to. I'm reading through Genesis and noticed in chapter 127 where God created man and said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply." But later in chapter 2, verse 5, it says, "There was no man to work the land." Absolutely. So one of the things we mentioned in podcasts is that these two stories aren't intended, and some people do a lot of gymnastics to show how you can. I get it. And if you want to do that, you totally can. I don't believe these two stories are supposed to be read in this historical linear. They don't work. They don't work. These are two different stories about creation. These are two different creation stories. They don't fit seamlessly. They don't even overlap well. So you have two stories that are talking about two different realities of creation, two different pieces of meaning about this creation that work hand in hand. I've often described it as like the paradox, the goodness of creation and the struggle of the human experience. Those two things, they're not mutually exclusive. They're not different. They coexist. And the Bible wants to start with the goodness of creation so that the struggle of human existence finds itself within this larger framework that helps give a reference point that's really important. That's why we say trust the story. Start Genesis 1. That's why those things are so important. I would say if you want to read a little bit about this, I do believe Sandra Richter in Epic of Eden. Brent put a link to that book like an hour ago up in the chat. But Sandra Richter in Epic of Eden addresses that. So do a ton of other people, like a ton of other people. But that's one book that I felt like was accessible, and she did a good job of acknowledging that. So yeah, that's what I'd say to that, Destiny. Why does it seem out of order? Because it is. It's not designed to be in order, and it's not supposed to be a seamless story at all. So, and I think we addressed that in those first few episodes. If you go back and just listen to, we acknowledge like, hey, this is probably not supposed to be read this way. So let's read it a different way. Let's try to read it the way that the author's intending for it to be read. I think it's a good general rule to get to know someone before we talk about each other's sin. It is a good general rule, Adam. Yeah. I would agree with that. I would agree. Such a great, should be a no-brainer. Shelby gets in there. Yep. What is your wife like? Personality, Enneagram number? My wife is an Enneagram 9. So I'm an 8. She's a 9. I think she's made me like an 8-wing 9, and I've made her like a 9-wing 8. So I don't know if we were always that way, but that's who she is. What is she like? She is fun. Is she in there? Can you hear my voice? I think I hear her in the laundry room. Oh, maybe it's just the washer. Dang it. I thought she might be in there. Let's see here. She's the fun-loving one. Like, she's just gonna have fun. She's Reed is asking if I ever answered his question. Well, if you'd stay on the live stream, Reed, you'd find out. My wife is God has used her. I don't want to be sacrilegious when I say she's my salvation, but my wife has just routinely, I take life so seriously. I can be so anxiety ridden. I can be so passionate and convicted about things. I can be so angry. And my wife is the one that will never let me take life too seriously. And I am unbelievably better for it. That's one of about a million things about my wife that I could tell you about. But man, what do you all talk about that excites you? We don't ever have a hard time making up conversation. We have just like fun, like just regular old fun. We don't have like we can have super deep conversations. We do. That's not a normal for us. We love to sit in the hot tub and talk about things that we love to talk about. UFC. We play Wordle every day. We're normal. We're normal people. That's a lie. We're anything but normal. Look at me. I'm not normal. Neither is she, but we're normal-ish. Your explanation of justice in the podcast has really changed my life and made me encouraged about my future. I feel like my life is supposed to be about restorative justice. Absolutely. Absolutely. And to reframe that with a little bit more of an Eastern perspective is liberating for a ton of people, even myself. Even myself, who's not like an activist type personality, but to have that component in my theology was missing that. Oh, I wish I knew what great answer I had. I had a great answer to something. Shucks. Let's see here. Yep. Okay, man. Renewed or new covenant. Yeah. Daniel, I do like that. Brit Hadashah. Yep, absolutely. That's the Hebrew expression for that. Type 9 that loves USC. I know. I know, Ty. It's crazy. Yes, a lot of people have talked about a renewed covenant. I like that language. I think in certain cases you can even make that case. And I do think new covenant in the Greek can even oftentimes mean that. I do find it interesting that in some passages, we have inserted the word new into the manuscript. Like, for instance, in the Lord's Supper passage, when Jesus says, "This is my blood," and our Bibles always say, "This is my blood of the new covenant. This is the blood of the new covenant." If you look at your footnote, if your Bible's worth anything, it should tell you your earliest manuscripts don't have the word new, because Jesus literally just said, "This is the blood of the covenant. This is my blood of the covenant." This is the same covenant that God had made with his people prior. And Jesus is saying, I'm fulfilling that covenant now. The thing that we're doing tonight at Passover is about Passover. It is made of the same stuff. So I think that's absolutely big takeaway from the live stream. I need a hot tub. You are welcome. That has my rabbinical stamp of approval, John. I don't know if you need to get anybody. I don't know your life situation. I don't know if you got a wife or a family that you need a green light from, but you got my, I'm backing that up. You got my there you go. Boom. I'll write you the rabbi's note. Love it. Question that most of the Christians that want to dig down deeper: where is the historicity of the Bible begin? Is it a big issue about the historicity? Like, where does it begin? Yeah. Yeah, in a lot of ways it's asking like that wrong question, because the Bible doesn't work with our parameters, right? So the Bible doesn't have the same concern that about historicity, or the same reference point of historicity that the Westerner has. So it's never a question that the Bible's answering well. Doesn't mean it's not an okay question to ask. It just means that there's a dissonance, like it's not speaking the same language. So there are some ways you can answer that. Like, you can say Genesis 12, the genre, the literature changes in Genesis 12. You can see it in the English. Like, I think you can definitely see it in the Hebrew, but you can see it in the English. It's not difficult to notice that you go from like big stories about global floods and creation mythology and genealogies and towers of Babel, and then all of a sudden you're like, and then there was a man named Abraham, and then we start following Abraham. Like, the whole genre of literature changes. It's not big stories of origin. It's about a guy who goes from this place and he sets up camp outside of Bethel and Ai, and then he goes down to Egypt and he's there for this amount of time. And he comes back out and he goes to the Oak of Memory, and that's a different kind of literature. And that still doesn't mean that now at Genesis 12, well, now it's 100% historical veracity. It just means the genre of literature is operating with a more historical reference point. I would say most scholars acknowledge there has to be a dude that was real named Abraham. Like, that story has to have some historical veracity to it, because he's at the heart of every narrative of those people groups in that part of the world, from Islamic traditions to Jewish traditions to other ancient tales and regional. Like, the dude had to have been a guy that was there. Um, so there you go. That's what I think about that. But then every genre of literature changes, and even within those genres, they will use literary tools, and they will subvert stories and myths from outside. They'll take those, they'll rewrite them. That doesn't mean they're not historically true. It just means, from a literary standpoint, they're using things that everybody's used to in order to communicate inspired, authoritative meaning, rather than historically viable truth. And what I mean by that is, like, that it literally happened is less important than God's communicating the inspired meaning to his people that he wants them to learn from those stories. When is Ray visiting the podcast? I sent the email months ago. Might have even been a year ago. Ray's never written back, ever. Ray's only written me one email back. It was all the way back in 2008. It was about the money that we needed to pay for my trip. He's never answered any other email I've ever sent him. So if I see him in person, I will ask him, but I sent the email. I have no optimistic hope that he's going to answer that email or that he may even want to be in my podcast. He may hate the way I have represented him. Who knows? If he never shows up in the podcast, we'll never know. So there you go. I don't know. I don't know if Ray will ever get on the podcast. We'll see. Are you enjoying your journey as you learn biblical Hebrew? Yes. Today was a bad day. I had a bad day of class today. I didn't perform well, didn't do well. I'm not learning my verbs my binyan. I'm not learning it like I ought to. I'm behind on vocab, which is hard for me to honestly accept because I've always been such an amazing student. And it's been years since I was in a class. And if I were getting an actual grade, it would be like a C or a B. And that's because I've changed. And I think for the better, but it's made me a worse student. And I struggle with that. Guess what? I'm like all of you. I'm just like all of you. I have the same struggles and insecurities, and I'm not awesome at everything that I do. Even stuff that I should be awesome at, I'm not, and I'm too busy and all the stuff, right? Yep. Let's see here. I went back to listen to the podcast from the beginning, so I'm a bit behind in your current episodes. But would you ever explore the history of Judaism since Jesus' time? Um, we do a little bit here and there, and we'll continue to do it when it's relevant. But that's really outside of my lane. I'll just be honest. I have no necessarily any desires to make that my lane. There's so much I want to study within biblical content and history and a law and bibliography I'm trying to get better at and get through. That will probably just be something that's outside my expertise, and it would be much better for everybody, myself included, if I let other people give commentary to that. And it's not that I'll never talk about it or it's off limits. It's just it's outside my realm, and that's okay. My final class begins in 25 minutes, and I'm with you, struggling to be a good student. Well, then, Adam, we're in good company. It's 10:08. It's time for me to get out of here. 2 hours and 7 minutes. Okay, everybody. It's always fun to hang out. Thanks for all of you that support our ministry financially and with prayers and everything else. Thanks for showing up to this stuff. It makes it fun. Um, thanks for caring. Thanks for listening. Thanks for all the stuff. Like, it's just fun to be a part of something that so many people engage and you want to. And that's unbelievably encouraging, more than you know. So I always enjoy these. I always say, when's the next one? Let's see. The next Q&A is the 21st of April on Facebook. So the Bema Facebook page, 21st of April will be our next Q&A. All right, everybody? Thanks, everybody, for your well wishes. I'm looking at these last comments. That's awesome. Beautiful. Yep. All right. It's always fun. Until next time, we'll see you then. Catch you guys later. Bye.